Hello, and welcome to our Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. As Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree, so let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheesley Balis, and today's episode, we're talking about creating positive social environments for adolescents. My guests today are Kelly and Adam Ladd. Kelly spent 12 years teaching history, theater, journalism, and speech and debate in public high school before earning her AMI credential in adolescent studies. She's taught at both Ruffing Montessori School and Hudson Montessori School. Adam received his AMI certification in 2015 after working for a year under the guidance of AMI consultant Pat Ludick at Hudson Montessori School, and he soon became the coordinator of that program. In 2020, Kelly and Adam moved to Arizona to help start a farm-based adolescent program, and now they serve as international consultants. They have just moved back to Ohio, where they are about to help launch another new adolescent program near Cincinnati. We are delighted to have Kelly serving as one of our adolescent community mentors with the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. If you're stepping into a new role in an adolescent community or would like support in developing skills and structures for your programs. So welcome, Kelly and Adam. We're so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so this is such an important topic for those running adolescent communities. The key is that the social dynamic in the classroom influences everything else. Right? It influences how the students feel, how they operate, their academics. It impacts everything. So I'm so delighted that we're digging into this today together. I think this can really serve our communities. So let's talk about, first, describe what a positive social environment looks like for adolescents.
Well, I think a positive social environment is one that is, and something I had to learn and kind of come to terms with is that a positive social environment is one that can look messy at times. And I think that it's supposed to be that way. Sometimes some of the situations and things that arise in these types of small communities that we have, we think of them as negative and we think of them as things that need to be fixed and solved, but I've had to learn over the past few years to kind of step back and to be able to realize and come to terms with the fact that they need some of the messiness that naturally occurs, because that is how they learn how to navigate through it. And we're there not necessarily to solve all of their problems and to create this utopia for them to exist in. We're there to help them navigate the difficulties. And so the difficulties are always going to be there and the challenges will always be there. But a positive social environment is one in which the guides, the teachers are able to step back and observe and to just help the students navigate through everything that's happening. And I think that is, for me, that is a positive social environment. Is one that is messy, but it's one where everybody feels supported through the messiness.
Because I think too, as the adult, like I've learned this probably the last couple of years, is that I do want to jump in right away when I see something happening. And we both talked about this, the idea of intuition as an adult, like when is it the appropriate time to step in a situation? And when is it a time for you just to observe and let the community itself handle some of these things? We talked about the fact too of being proactive to start that positive social environment. And we really believe in like first day starting about, talking about community ethics. Like how do you as a student want to be treated by your fellow classmates? How do you want to be treated by the guides? What are your expectations just for yourself? And I think putting that back on the student kind of really helps set the tone for what the community should be like. The other thing that I love that you really have done and shown me a lot, whether it was at Hudson or Creo, is that sometimes when there is a situation in the community that maybe doesn't allow for the positive environment we're trying to create, something's going on and it's rippling through, oftentimes we just stop everything. We stop whatever classes are going on, whatever's happening, we stop it and we have the community come together so that we can talk about it. And it's not like it's going to be solved. I know for me, I have a hard time. I don't like conflict. It's something I really try to avoid. And yet it has to happen. And so having community restarts or resets where we go back and look at the ethics again, and really making a point early on that the ethics aren't just something that, we talk about at the beginning and then we never come back to again. Like they have to be such a core part of the environment, that the students, they built these ethics. And so this is how they want their community to be. And so it has to be on them to want to see that happen throughout.
And can you talk a little bit? I have so many questions, but let's start with what do your community ethics look like? What are those kind of key components? I know the students create them, but for those who are new in this conversation or may not have explored that as deeply, what are you really looking to have generated there?
Well, we asked the students on day one to silently, kind of go through this exercise, this process of thinking of, like Kelly said, of what they expect of themselves, of the guides, of each other and their peers. And usually what they come up with is, and when they all come back together and share out what they came up with, it usually ends up boiling down to things like, like respect is always one of those. And so whenever they bring that up, though, we ask them, well, what does that mean? And what does respect look like in action? It's an easy word to say, but we try to dissect it and figure out exactly what that means. And so they really end up creating this list of behaviors and attitudes that are really all about being civil. It's all about civility with one another. It's about existing within a community of people who are like you and people who are different than you, in a way that everyone can feel like they are a part of something and that they are accepted, and that they are supported. And so it ends up being about respect, but also just about using polite language. A lot of times students will come up with things too about just having a sense of humor and not taking yourself too seriously. They usually want the guides, they come up with a list for us as well, but they usually want us to be able to really listen to them and to not judge them too quickly, to know when they need help, even when they're not asking for it.
Yeah.
I mean, they really come up with some really good points that help to guide us throughout the year as well, because it's something we can return to and say, oh, this is what they're asking of us. This is what they need of us. So they usually end up being like that. And then we'll make a list. I've used in the past, I've created like a committee of student volunteers who would want to be on an ethics committee. Some years they make like an artwork around the ethics that kind of represent the community, and we post it in every single room of the environment, including in the school van, and we just have it everywhere, and in their agenda binders that we have them carry around. Sometimes it's just a list of words, but it is, like Kelly said, it is something we can come back to whenever there is any kind of issue. It's like coming back. It's like in law, being able to come back to the Constitution, being able to come back to some originating document that everybody was a part of. So it really acts as a foundation, and I think it helps to start a year off on that good footing, that strong foundation for creating that positive social environment where everyone can feel supported and guided.
But even though that sounds wonderful, you're still going to see some messes. Like there's still going to be things that are going to happen where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, did we not create community ethics? And so I think that yeah, that's still gonna happen too, just,
Mhm.
because I know, like, I get so excited at the beginning of the year because we do all of this, and then, I come at it like, oh, why is this happening? Don't you see these beautiful things that you've created? And it's, I mean, it's part of the growth, it's part of, the
And you're-
learning.
Yeah, and you're always going to have students that don't necessarily take it seriously for whatever reason.
Mhm.
There are students who are just, they fear being vulnerable. There are probably 1,000 different reasons why maybe some students just don't take to it, or they want to make light of it. But I think it's important too, and this is something that I don't know that there's a real science to, but to create an environment throughout the year too, where there's positive peer pressure. Because those students who don't necessarily take the ethics seriously, or they just haven't internalized that type of community living yet, they respond better to their peers than they do to adults. And so if you can create a community with certain students who really do value that way of living and working together, and get those students, build them up and build up their courage for them to be the ones that speak up and speak out, and that demand that it's a civil community that they have. That always helps too, because there's only so much the adults can really do when it comes to behaviors and in the way that students treat one another. Everything is better coming from them as much as possible. So I'm always trying to find those ways to help them be the voices and be the ones that are bringing things up and that are correcting each other as much as possible.
And so can you talk about what it looks like when you have somebody who, let's say, is not following the community ethics, and you maybe have a student that you don't necessarily have the structure in place, or the students don't have the social standing to stand up to someone who is not operating by the community ethics. Because I think sometimes what happens is that there's somebody who is really has strong leadership skills or is able to pull other members of the classroom, right? And so how do you respond to that in real time? What are the structures, what are strategies that folks can use?
I have I have two stories to tell. I have one story where exactly, I pulled a student aside. We had multiple conversations. Like, this is sort of what I'm seeing in the environment. Like, why do you think things are happening like this? And how do you think that we can change it? Like, having those conversations, like it's the what, why sandwich or whatever. But we've gone through that before, and I'm pulling them aside, not doing it in front of everybody else, but just asking them to have that conversation. And I had so many conversations with one student this year that I just couldn't. I didn't know what else to do. I had kind of lost all ability, and I had Adam come in and talk. It was just, I really want to like be able to offer like in here, and it worked, and I was, but it was really a challenge. It was really challenging to just try to figure out what was I doing, like what was I doing wrong that I wasn't able to reach this student, like where was that disconnect. And that was really hard this year. That was really hard on me because I take things like that very seriously. And I mean, I'm really pretty good at being vulnerable with students. They've seen me cry. And I don't know. I mean, they know that one was really, and I haven't stopped thinking about that and what maybe I should have done differently to come at the situation in a different way. Now, I had another student. She is a leader. Her leadership skills are very different. Like sometimes she can be bossy. She knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to tell students what to do. And a lot of times that's caused her to lose friendships or to make the community really upset with her. And I was fortunate because, we had this student for 2 years. And so right away when these things would happen, and we're both a little bit alike. Like we're both very kind of controlling, and we see things. And so her and I would have a lot of those conversations too. And we talk about like, so here's what I see. You have this passion for leadership. You know what needs to be done. How can you ask students to help in a different way? Because right now you're kind of coming across really bossy. And at the same time, as a female, we get
Right.
that, right? We get that stereotype or that, and so I'm trying to explain to her too, like you're a woman, like we have this other challenge that's there that we don't even really want it to be there. It's just the stigma in society. And so I wanted to make sure that she was empowered, but also knew how to talk to the other students, how to ask for help, how to give opportunities to students who really needed some type of like leadership, right? That needed to have that boost and like let her step aside a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the second year with her, and we still had some ups and downs, but oh my gosh. I think it's the thing too, like as the guide, you need to step back sometimes and be able to like really appreciate the growth that they're going through. Because
Mm-hmm.
by the end of the year, it wasn't like things were perfect, but oh my gosh, so many times that first year where she would have stepped in and she might have like said something that sort of snide or like been more aggressive in a comment, she stepped back. She there was another student very similar to her who would like to say things to her to get her riled up, like he knew what buttons to press. And I watched as the year progressed where she stepped away. She didn't let that get to her. I mean, she was going off to a boarding school, but at the end of this year, and she told me, she's like, I really do think I want to do event planning. And I'm like, I think you should. All of the major events we had this year, she took part in. And she did, but she learned through all those different challenges. Like she figured out who she was through it because of those conversations that her and I had privately, and like talked it through. And the other big thing too with these challenges like this, I'm a firm believer that you need to have parents on board. Like parent communication is really key. I know I had taught at a high school for 12 years, a public high school, and like I think that there's this other cloud of like parent communication being so scary and like, because you're not really calling to tell them something positive, it always feels like. And so with my Montessori background, I learned right away, like if you get parents on board and get them to trust you and show that you guys are both there together to support these young people.
That's
Yeah,
right.
academics are great, but to support each other in like their moral and social development being key. I think that there's this ability to be able to say like, oh, this is what's happening at home. I don't understand what's going on. And then being able to say, well, this is what's happening at school. So how do we work together to be able to, help the student? And that luckily, like that family with the young lady I was talking about, they were very much, the great communicators, and we had a really good relationship. And that was key, I think. So, and it's not always going to be that way. With the first story I said, I mean, there were some challenges sometimes with communication there. I think we both wanted the same thing. We just didn't know how maybe to communicate with each other about it. So,
Well, and it sounds like you were very proactive about communicating with those families, building the relationship, building the connection, and making sure that families were aware of what the social dynamics were and what support was needed. And I have to say, I was bossy from the time I was born. And I had to learn those skills without any coaching, without any support, just out of watching how people were responding to me. And I would have been so grateful to have somebody see my leadership capacity and also be willing to say, hey, let's talk about ways to do this. Like, what a gift to any person, because coaching is caring. And that's one of the things that we have to really underscore here is that I appreciate Adam giving it space. I do. For sure we can't come in and meddle all the time, but we also have to be responsible for the fact that these are the toddlerhood of adulthood, right? And these adolescents, and that coaching really matters to them, what the feedback they're getting. And especially the way, Kelly, you were talking about it. I mean, there was so much love present, so much appreciation for these young people that I can see it just kind of, I'm not saying it's easy. and then it goes in automatically. But with that much love and appreciation, because what I didn't hear when you were sharing that is any make wrong. And what I think where we lose it as the adults in the environment is when we make a student wrong, when we step out of appreciation for them, when we blame them. And we never can blame the child. We can never blame the adolescent. It doesn't mean that we don't hold them accountable. I've had people think that, and that's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying we have to come into it just like you were saying, okay, how do I do this work? How do I approach this differently? How do I come in? Whose voice could they hear? How do I, rather than just saying, oh, well, they're not hearing me. It's, I'm stepping back and it's over. I think I want to make sure that folks know that the responsibility doesn't end just because they're not doing what you've asked them to do.
Right.
Right? We continue to have to, with all children, all adolescents continue to have to be in the conversation and stay with it.
And I think the other thing that's really, I mean, working together, it's mostly been you and I, and then this last year we had other adults that were around with us too. And I think the other thing that I need to learn sometimes still too is that when I am working with a student who, we are challenging each other, like maybe my first story, like I still think that just because that student was my advisee, I felt like that responsibility, which I, as a guide, regardless of advisee or not, like you're right, you still have that responsibility. But I keep wondering, like, should I have asked for more help? I should have asked for more help. Like I should have had, others, because everybody has different relationships with everyone, right? Like, I mean, in society, community, like there's certain people you feel more comfortable going to talk to as opposed to somebody else. Same thing in an adolescent community, right? They may have other, guides or adults that they feel more comfortable talking to. And so, I think too, like stepping back and being able to, as an adult, say, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I'm not sure what's happening, but I need you. Can you please come in and talk, to the student? Because I feel like, we're either too much alike or something's happening where there's a disconnect and I need help. I think that's the big thing the adult needs to remember too, is that sometimes it's okay to say, like, I need help, because just being in the world, you need people to be supportive and help you because you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers.
Well, I think that's also good role modeling. And I think you could say to the student, look, you and I have been in this conversation for, 3 months now, and clearly I'm not being effective. And I care about you so much that I've asked so-and-so to talk to you because I think you have a beautiful connection with them. And coaching is caring. So I want you to hear this from somebody who can resonate with you. And that student, what they're also learning is when things are hard or challenging and I'm not effective, oh, I can look at it a different way. I can come at it from a different angle, right? Which is just what a gift for their lifetime to also understand that you're not just giving up on them, right? That you're not just going to ride it out. You're still in that conversation about supporting them. And I think that's really beautiful. And we know as adults when we have it and when we don't with a student. And to your point, Kelly, we're not going to have it with every student. It's just there are always going to be people who we resonate with and we don't resonate with. So, but it also sounds like both of you do quite a bit of spiritual preparation for yourselves to be ready to hold this every day, because this is a big work, right? And working with these young people as their brains are changing shape and they're pruning neural pathways and reorganizing. And my understanding, I have a child this age, by the way, full disclosure, I have a 13-year-old. And so this experience of them losing all of these skills also that they used to have and then having to rebuild. I mean, it's a lot, right? So can you talk a little bit about your spiritual preparation?
Yeah, I can talk about this a little bit. I think Maria Montessori, when she wrote and she spoke to teachers, she spoke of spiritual preparation a lot, and the importance of it, and how, you know, she brought up that that's the real preparation for education, is the preparation of oneself, and the study of oneself, she said. And I think it's probably at least partially because she knew that this kind of work, that doing education this way, really is more of a mentorship than it is, you know, being a delivery system of knowledge. You know, we're not there to just fill empty vessels with content knowledge and send them on their way. When we walk into the prepared environment each day, we are coaches and we are mentors, and it's draining. We're there for so much more than just teaching. That's one of the big things that, having some experience now with bringing in new staff, new guides who have no Montessori background and coming from more traditional environments, one of the first things I try to explain, but I also tell them, I can talk as long as I have breath, but you still have to just experience this to understand what I'm saying. But I try to explain that, you know, this is very different than just teaching. Like, you are a mentor now. You're an advisor, you're a coach, you're a curator of an environment. So it's very different. And I think Dr. Montessori, of course, she knew that, and she knew that that takes a lot of inner work on our part. It's not just about getting ready for a lesson and knowing which, you know, bullet points we want to cover with the students. It's about getting our hearts ready and our spirits ready for a potentially, you know, just challenging and kind of draining day, because we have to give so much of ourselves every day to both students and colleagues and parents.
Yeah.
We give so much of ourselves every day, that it takes a lot. And I learned a lot of this from Pat Ludick. I got to work under her for a year, AMI consultant. She's just wonderful, absolutely brilliant. She took spiritual preparation very, very seriously and really tried to instill it in the guides that she worked with, and she would lecture on it at the AMI adolescent training, and, you know, half the people there would just be in tears by the end of it. So I learned a lot from her, and I have to say, even though I've learned so much from her about this, it's still the thing that I am the worst at, because it's not that I don't want to take care of myself. It's just I can become a little bit of a workaholic sometimes. And so sometimes if I'm doing something that's preparing myself spiritually, I feel like I'm not accomplishing the work that I need to do. And I'm constantly having to remind myself, no, the work I need to do first is me. You know, it's kind of like the thing in the airplane where they tell you to put your own oxygen mask on first before before the person beside you. That is kind of what spiritual preparation is about. And so what Pat would always tell us is that there are some practical ways you can go about doing it, preparing yourself. And one of those ways is to just simply, like, think about those things that bring you joy and that help to build up your self-confidence. For a lot of people, these are just hobbies. These are it's art, it's crafting, it's music, it's sports. Honestly, sometimes for me, this always makes me feel lazy, but sometimes I just need to sit down and watch one of my shows because it's just one moment of the day where I can just, like, decompress and envelop myself in a story, you know.
That's right. Somebody else's brain work.
Exactly. Yeah, but it can be all these. It could be working out, it could be riding a bicycle, but any of those things that just brings you joy, that helps you relax, that builds you up personally, those are things that you need to do. You need to make sure that you're not working so much that you're cutting those things out of your life. You need to make sure you're bringing those into your life, because those are the things that, even though you're not preparing for a lesson in that moment, you are preparing yourself for mentorship, and it's very important.
Well, and I think one of the things that the adolescents are looking to us for is that mental health.
Yeah.
And what I find is that mental health comes out of those first minutes in the morning, particularly, and how they're used. I have to fight my instinct almost daily to get up and get on my computer right away and to take care of the things that, right? And to instead, I have established a process for myself where I get up and I make a cup of lemon water. I drink my water. And I journal, and then I set my intentions, because that's one thing that we can also teach our adolescents for sure, is how to be intentional about what they want to create for themselves and their lives and their days. I think that's incredibly important spiritual work for them as well. And get intentional, particularly if I have a big event or something, a tough meeting coming up, I get really intentional. I write it out as if it's already happened. And I have my staff do the same thing, just, when they're facing something. And then I meditate, and it could be 5 minutes, right? But it's just that, and it makes such a difference in my day. And then it's almost like I consider it to be kind of my Wonder Woman costume. And then I'm like, bring it. Boom, boom, boom. I got it. Like I'm unflappable. Not always, but it does help immensely. And I also think it's important that the students are aware that you're doing that work and you're verbalizing that work to them, so that they're aware that because part of what I'm noticing culturally is we've stepped so far away from spirituality as a culture overall. We can't even hardly talk about it. Like, it's not something for one of the things that's really interesting is one of my daughters was talking about how most of her friends don't have any spiritual background in their homes. I'm not saying religious. I'm just talking about that their friends don't feel like they have a spiritual foundation. So that spirituality is so fundamental to those social relationships, because when they become isolated or they don't know how to navigate those experiences for themselves, they need to, that's when we look within. So we have to role model that. So I really appreciate you underscoring that, Adam, and that work, because I think it's some of our most important work. And it's different than this thing of like me time, which where it's all, because I think we have to be really careful. I think we're in a culture again that has become very individually focused. Very me, what about me? Attention on me. And our adolescents have grown up in that, right? Like, I'm older than you all. So I got to be in a time where I grew up when, there was a lot of community service, a lot of going to the church. Mom decided they needed to turn the garage around. Like, we had a single car garage, and they had a bunch of friends over, bought pizza and beer, and literally figured out how to lift the garage and turn it around. Like that kind of community effort that I haven't heard of that ever since, right? Like, it's that kind of coming together. And what does it mean to be connected? Because ultimately, and I am getting there, the spirituality of human beings is about that is a huge piece of our connection with each other. And not just even with people, but with the plants and the animals and our universe. And I think that's why Dr. Montessori talked so much about the spiritual preparation, because I think her work really wasn't academic. When I really read, her work was about humanity being connected with the cosmos and the great, really the greatness of the universe and of our planet and of living things, and having that love and reverence, which comes out of that spiritual work. And so clearly you can see I've been thinking about this lately.
is huge. It's so
Yeah.
important.
It is. It is. So, and maybe sometime we come back and talk about how you're working with spirituality with your students, because I think that's a whole nother conversation. But cycling back here to, excuse me, to the positive environments, I want to ask a couple specific questions. So what do you do when you have a student who's self-isolating? I'm seeing that come up more for us as the rates of anxiety and depression are skyrocketing particularly post-pandemic. I saw this happening. I don't actually think it's all coming out of the pandemic. I think it was a trajectory anyway, but it is certainly highlighted that need for students. What happens when you have a student who's saying, I don't want to participate, and really pulling themselves out? How do you support them in the environment?
Yes, please.
I don't want to talk too much,
No,
but
that's okay.
I can maybe start with this just to say that I am like a encyclopedia model of introversion. So I tend to I kind of gravitate toward the students that I can tell are introverts, because I know what it's like, and I know what it's like to grow up as an introverted person in such an extroverted society,
Mhm.
where introversion is seen as this negative quality.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that I go to those students and I allow them to just isolate themselves all the time, of course, but I think that for those of us who are of more introverted nature, we need time to process things, and the way that we recharge our batteries is by withdrawing and being alone momentarily. Whereas extroverts are the opposite. They recharge their batteries by socializing. And so what I try to do with those students that are in that place is I try to talk to them, and I definitely share with them that I understand their need to occasionally withdraw and have those quiet moments so that they can recharge their batteries and then re-engage again. But I think it's important to talk to them about the importance of engaging and the importance of being able to engage with others and to not just stay withdrawn all the time. And so talking to them about how can we find this balance, talking to them about like, how can we find, when are the moments of the day where you can kind of go off and sit under this tree for 10 minutes? And then when are the times of day where I can expect to see you fully engaging with your community? And kind of coming up with a plan for them. And I think for them, it's helpful just to know that they will have those times and those allowances to step away. Just having that comfort of knowing that they can step away, recharge their batteries, and then re-engage again, I think helps with the overall anxiety that can come from the pressure of feeling like you have to always be engaged, which is just like, draining the batteries and then having to survive on no energy at all. And that's anxiety producing big time. And so just allowing them to know that there will be times where you can go off and you can be by yourself for a moment is helpful for them.
I think if you have a student that's just isolating themselves because maybe they don't want to do the work or they don't want to work with a particular group of students, I think that's a completely different, because you're right, there are some students, like I'm an extrovert and so like I totally understand what you're saying about I get more energized by being with the group. And so I know I've watched our students like be so thankful to have you, to be able to go and talk to you and like to see a kindred soul. And so I think that's really important too. I think that there are times those students will isolate themselves as, maybe not because of mental health, because they just don't like something that's going on. And usually, even though of course Montessori is very big about students having choice, sometimes we break up groups and I don't want to use the word force, but we encourage strongly for them to work with other students outside of their particular comfort zone, right? And we talk about how to have like challenging conversations with one another. Like, how do you talk to someone that you're not normally used to talking to? Like, what, and we talk about, I'm really, I will say for myself, I'm very good at being open and honest with students about struggles that I myself face. With talking and having challenging conversations and just trying to like open up dialogue, and how I can feel shut down sometimes when someone will say something. And we spent a lot of time this year on communication, talking about what students need. And so trying to encourage them in that way and give them pointers of how to have conversations so that they're just not like, well, I'm just not going to do this because I'm not working with my friends. Like, and we talk a lot about the real world. If you have a job, you can't just say, well, I don't like Fred, so I'm not working with Fred anymore. You as an adult, you just do stuff like that. And we talk about that. And we also talk about, at least I talk about too, is that in the community, you are not going to be best friends with everyone. It just doesn't work that way, right? We're not best friends with everyone in our own larger communities.
That's right.
But goodness, you need to respect people. That doesn't mean that gives you the okay to just ignore them or to treat them differently and whatever. You still need to respect the people in your community. I'm not going to have you go off and sing kumbaya to one another or whatever. Like, I'm just really, I'm really big on respecting each other and being able to talk to each other in a respectful way, because it's challenging for adults too in that sense. But that's, I think they're surprised sometimes when I say, like, look, I'm not asking you to be best friends with everyone. I'm just saying you need to be able to treat everyone with respect. Exactly like what you said, to see the humanity in the person, right?
Right.
You may not agree, you may not, but the humanity. We're both here trying to do something, accomplish something. So,
And it goes back to the coaching piece again too. It's so many of these issues we face on a daily basis it goes back to coaching and the fact that they need coaching. They need mentorship. They need examples. They need to know, even just with interpersonal communication, just like spirituality, it's really lacking in today's society. They're not growing up with as much interpersonal communication as we did when we were growing up, because so much of their communication is on a screen. And so I think that they do need a little extra coaching when it comes to any kind of communication. And I remember one time, I can't remember if it was last year or this past year, where we were having a community meeting, and there were a number of students that just weren't fully like participating in what we were doing and in the work we were doing. And in some cases, a side note, in some cases that just means the work is not the right work, and that we need to figure out the right motivations for work. But in this case, I just told them, and we had a lot of very athletically minded students, and so I said, you know what, a lot of you play on sports teams outside of school, and you know that when the coach tells you to get in the game, you get in the game. You don't sit on the bench. And I said, right now I'm going to be that kind of a coach, and I'm telling you to get in the game. And it's time to get to work. You're a part of this team, and you don't get to choose when you're on the team and when you're not on the team. That's not a liberty that you have. And so I just kind of tried to become that kind of a coach for a moment. And they responded to it because they were able to connect that with this other aspect of their life, where there's this other kind of coach. When he or she says, I've got to get out there and do my part, I better do it, or else I might not be on the team next year.
Right.
So I think sometimes, I don't want to call it tough love or anything like that, but sometimes maybe there's something to just, becoming that kind of a coach. They just need that extra push.
Well, and I think that's again back to role modeling too, because you're also, not only are you demonstrating how to look within, how can I approach this in a different way so that I'm clear on my communication of what's needed here, but also you are role modeling how to do that with kindness, right? You can have a lot of clarity and a lot of firmness and still be very kind. And that's something I watch adolescents struggle with quite a bit, that they need examples of what does that look like, right? Because I think one of the things that I see them really grapple with is moving back and forth with their humor, and having their humor be kind. We did a podcast recently on play in the elementary classroom. We were distinguishing aggressive humor and making sure that the humor is not at others' expense. And what does it look like to have patience with others in the community as they're building skills? You know, there's all of those pieces. And what we know about adolescents is they always think everybody's looking at them, right? It's all about them. Everybody's looking at them. And so they kind of can lose some of that grace with all that pressure. And so I really appreciate that you're looking at your own communication. Okay, so last question. Are there specific lessons on communication that you give to the students as you're working through the year? Are you seeing areas that need significant support, things that we're finding, like I know, for example, there's a lot more social emotional need now for all the way through the children's house. Our little ones are coming in, not all, of course, but just in general, they have a lot more need. Our older one, there's all this need. I have a lot of theories on that. I think they're way too connected to screens. I think they're way disconnected from nature. You talked about they don't have as much practice communicating with each other in person. So how are you all supporting those efforts as they're building those skills?
Yeah, okay. Well, we do a couple different things. I mean, it's not I love advisory. I think advisory is so fun. Because usually we introduce different topics, and sometimes it can be about communication and how your communication can be misconstrued, and sarcasm. Oh my goodness, like sarcasm, I think is the humor that I'm like struggling with the most right now. But we do have specific advisory meetings talking about how do you communicate with one another. But I think what's more impactful for students is having these situations like seminars. So if you do a current event seminar or you do a literary seminar, and just how to disagree with one another respectfully. Like, how do you ask a question without making it seem like you're challenging a person? I think those are really impactful, because yes, I know it's like, it's a 45-minute or whatever, how long it is, and they're practicing that. But I mean, I'm hoping they take the skills they learn there and are able to use them, as they're talking about things at lunch or whatever the case may be. We've also read a couple books together. This year we read The Four Agreements, and I know it has some religious undertones in it, but we talked about that. Like, we talked about the fact this was not meant to like try to change anyone's views or beliefs, but and that really challenged a lot of them, talking about, be precise with your wording. Like, the seminar we had over that was really interesting, because some of them, they had a hard time with it because they took it very literal. And then others were just like, no, I see how this is supposed to be how we are to be in the world. Like, it was really a great seminar. And it was really interesting to hear the students talk about, the interactions they had with each other, and just, the writing, the author's words. We also read a book called Brainstorm by Dr. Daniel Siegel. And that one's great because that's not only just us reading it together, like, it also, we encourage the parents to read it along with the students. So, because it's all about the student, it's all about, the adolescent and all that brain work that's happening. And it has parts too where it talks about the social emotional piece, like how one day you come in and you feel this way, and then, you might lash out at people, and like just kind of looking at all the different factors that are there. But a lot of it too, like you said, they're very much aware that it's all about them. And at the same time, like even Pat, I remember Pat really stressing this too. They are watching us. They are watching how we interact with each other. They're watching the conversations we have. And so, like, I won't lie, I have moments where I forget, and I will I might let something slip, whether it's, making a snarky comment or something. And then, students pick up on that. So you got to watch. I know as a married couple too, like I take great pride in the fact that I think we're very professional as a married couple. Like, I think that, toot toot, I think we do a good job of showing what it can look like for two people to be married and to work together. I think that we do a nice job with that. That is something I'm proud of. My humor, sometimes I could probably rein it back in, because I know I'm silly and funny with the students, but sometimes I wonder too, like, how am I saying something that now makes it seem like it's okay for them to say, you know what I mean? Like how, like where I think I'm being innocent and they're like, oh, well, you know, Mrs. Ladd was being sort of sarcastic here. And so, but yeah, I hope that answered your question. We try to do it, practice conversation, but we try to do it very intentionally.
Yeah, I can build on that just a little bit too. Kelly mentioned seminar, and I see that as a really, really great place to help them learn good communication skills. Because I've seen you many times in starting a seminar, especially at the beginning of a school year, but even going back to it occasionally when we notice them going off track a little bit. But Kelly will ask them, okay, what are some ways that you can disagree respectfully with somebody?
Right.
And having them actually think about it and having them form the words in the sentences instead of just telling them this is how you do it. Have them come up with it and come up with a few different examples that are coming from their peers and from each other. And then I've noticed in just observing seminars and listening to them, they actually do use that language. After they come up with it, they will practice using it. And sometimes I've even seen when somebody doesn't practice using that language, somebody else will call them out for it and say, no, that's not how we disagree with each other. And it's really pretty amazing to see that. And I think seminar is a wonderful place for that to happen. And then I know one other way we've done it too. We've done, I think we've done this in advisory, but we've also done it as part of our peace education study. But we talk a lot about conflict resolution, and we start with interpersonal conflicts and internal conflicts, and then kind of show how those same conflicts elevate and become the conflicts that start wars. On the international stage. But when it comes to conflict resolution, we'd have them in small groups come up with skits. And they would write, we might give them a fun little prompt that would give them a scenario, but then they would have to, with a couple of the students, write a skit and then act it out in front of everybody where they like, here's the conflict, this is what happens, and then here's how it can be resolved in a good way. And have them kind of go through it in a fun, kind of dramatic way, but it's still, you know, they need those specific examples. They need the specific language on how to communicate. And
I
just
think
finding those moments
that's so brilliant. I first of all, I've never heard of reading the 4 agreements in class. I love that. 4 agreements, brainstorming, and to have those, even the role plays and building the structure. Is there a model that you all are using specifically for conflict resolution?
No, not a specific model. I have drawn a little bit off of different pieces like the Arbinger Peace Institute and some of the work that they've done. But I don't think I use a specific model. I know I brainstorm with students about what are the seeds of conflict. And this is something I also kind of borrowed from Pat. I can't take credit for it, but we'll talk about what are the seeds of conflict? What are the things that internally happen within oneself that can end up growing into a conflict between oneself and another person? And so we'll brainstorm and make a whole list, almost like we have the community ethics. We end up with a whole list of these are the seeds of conflict. And then those are what we use as the basis for their skits that they then brainstorm, how do you resolve these conflicts? Or how do you, we even talk about how can you take care of these seeds of conflict internally within yourself before they become conflicts. And so I haven't really used a specific platform for conflict resolution because I try to do it more through their brainstorming and what they're coming up with, and then use that as the basis of what we're talking about as much as we can.
That sounds great. I love that. I've never heard the seeds of conflict and doing that. I think that's an excellent idea. Well, we are almost at an hour.
Oh wow.
Okay.
It goes really fast, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. It's been just a pleasure to talk to you today and to learn more about how to support our adolescents, our precious, precious adolescent communities that are just such a gift to the world and to the adolescents in this important work. So thank you for spending time with us today. We are so appreciative. And just want to say thank you to our listeners. We're so happy that you've spent time with us. We know you have a lot of calls on your time. If you are in the work of Montessori or in teaching in general, you know, there's always something to do, and we appreciate you spending your time with the Greenspring Center podcast. And this is a Montessori revolution. We're in it together. We are better together. We're so thankful for you and the work you're doing. Let's see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right. We get it, Kate?